Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the course Conflict and Crisis Management Studies, Stroke, Global Peace and Terrorism. I am Apostle Reverend Dr. Aaron, Immanuel. I am going to take this sharing in two segments. First, I'm going to look at terrorism, global peace and terrorism, and its management before I go into conflict and crisis management. So bear with me. The course title is Conflicts and Crisis Management Studies, as well as Global Peace and Terrorism. The course code PCR 410, PCR 710, GPT 413, GPT 713. The four series are for the undergraduate program students and the 700 series for the graduate program. Now, let's begin by looking at the term peace. What do you understand by peace? Is it possible for a man to be at peace with himself? Is it possible for a man to be at peace with his neighbor? And then how does it affect us on the global scale? First, let's look at what peace is. Peace can be defined as a state of security and order within a community provided by law or by custom. Peace is a state of security or order within a community provided by law or provided by custom. Peace can also be defined as mutual harmony between people and people groups. And if you take this and you look at it from the global perspective, then we will agree with Wikipedia's definition that global peace is the concept of an ideal state of peace within and among all people and all nations of the world. This is a concept of an ideal state of peace where nations are at mutual harmony with one another, persons are at mutual harmony with one another, cultural groups are at harmony with one another, etc., etc. Now, different cultures, different religions, different philosophies, and organizations have varying concepts of how such a state of peace would come about. And this is where the friction actually arises because of a particular group assessment, evaluation, and expectation of what peace ought to be. All right. So what do you understand by the term terrorism? I know that we are well acquainted with what terrorism is. We have heard of terror acts. Somehow you possibly, if you are in Nigeria and living in Nigeria, there are certain happenings in Nigeria that are terrorist acts. And outside the borders of Nigeria, we have Ukraine and Russia at war. Those are acts of terrorism. So we have domestic terrorism. We have international terrorism. Hello, I think we do also have terrorism in the family. So terrorism is calculated, planned application of force, violence, and intimidation by a group of people on a given population or a given community or a given nation for the purpose of enthroning a particular religious or political system. Now, Since this field of terrorism is wide, we can also see it from the point of trying to entrench a desired economic system by the group that pursues after it. Okay? Okay? Good. So terrorism is unlawful. Terrorism is unlawful. It's not provided by the law. Law of mutual respect, law of mutual well-being, and it is a threat to peace. Terrorism is a threat to peace. Terrorism is a threat to security. It's a threat to human rights and sustainable development. Terrorism brings trauma, unimaginable sufferings, and victims, families, and communities tend to be on the losses. Apart from trauma, losses, loss of life, loss of property, loss of economic strength, loss of peace, loss of health. So terrorism sabotages national economies at large. Causes of terrorism. I think this is a good thing for us to learn now. What are the things that cause for breach of peace by a group against other groups? Number one, marginalized minority communities rise up when they are pushed to the wall, rise up to contend for liberty. And so they form militia groups that go out to attack, to destroy, to send a message of we can't take it anymore. It's either we kill or we are killed, and we are ready for it. Number two, high levels of youth unemployment. Look across the globe, look across nationals, look across nations, you discover where there's a high percentage of youth that are unemployed. They will certainly rise up against the state. They will certainly rise up against the rich. Number three, politics of discrimination. Politics of communalism. What do we mean by that? You see, a group of people will just feel we want to entrench our people group over the other people groups. For example, in Nigeria, what IPOD is trying to do, which we label them as terrorists, is because they want to fight against the discrimination that their people are experiencing in the midst of a federal government system. So, politics of communalism and discrimination. Whenever you see a people discriminated against, it may take a little while of time, but they will certainly revolt. Number four, fanatic religious movements. Religious movements that become fanatical. You see a sect within a religious group fighting other sects in that same religious group. Number five, inequality and economic gap. Inequality and economic gap. People who find themselves on the lower rung of the economy do always bring themselves together ultimately, except their situation is ameliorated, to fight the state. Technology is also one of the reasons for terrorism. When a group of people lay hold on a technology, they can use it to fight others. For instance, computer virus. You don't know it's like an act of terrorism. People use their electronic devices to terrorize, to send wrong messages, to discriminate against others and put others in bad light. People use technology to rob others. So we can classify that as within the ambit of technological or terrorism caused by the possession and the application of technology. Energy also is a source of crisis. Energy is also a cause for terrorism. Look at Nigeria, for instance. The Fulanis are looking for grazing land. Look at the Niger Delta people. The oil that is taken from their land is taken by others who are not of that extraction. And so you see the youth in such groups who are jobless, rising to say, this resource belongs in our land. Why is it taken by people who don't belong here to develop themselves? And so they rise up to oppose such acts, which those who are advantaged don't see as injustice. Number 8, political leadership struggles between incumbents and challengers is also a root cause of terrorism. PDP, APC, etc., castigating one another. There are thugs going after the members of the other political party, burning of opposition party members' houses, farmlands, etc. Political leadership struggles also causes terrorism to erupt among a people group. Polarized political and economic opinions. What about illiteracy? What about illiteracy? It's called some people almajiris. They don't know anything. And you call yourself educated, you have everything. And these young boys, they rise up from the lower rung of life. They live with you in the same community, in the city. And they are so deprived. They cannot speak the language you are speaking. They cannot enter the offices that you are entering. So what happens? They get up any opportunity given to them, they will be recruited to fight those who are in position. Now, having said this, we can categorize terrorism in two ways, or two types of terrorism, or two dimensions of terrorism. Number one, the domestic terrorism within. That's terrorism from within. And then there's the international terrorism. In domestic terrorism, we find terrorist acts perpetrated by groups within a nation, whereas international terrorism is perpetrated between nation and another, or a religious group from one nation arming another a religious group in another nation that has allegiance with it. Shabab. in in Somalia is linked with Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda supplies Al Shabaab weapons to fight the legitimate government in Somalia. So, that said, let's look at management of terrorism. How can we manage terrorism? Number one, protection of human infrastructure. Protection of human infrastructure. We need nurses, we need doctors, we need people in the fire service, the military are human infrastructure that need to be protected and prepared for acts of terrorism. If we don't have such human infrastructure, when acts of terrorism is initiated or invented upon a country or a community, that community will be helpless in the hands of the terrorists. So, first thing to do in protecting or managing terrorism is to protect human infrastructure, the health sector and the military, first responders. Number two, we must be able to identify potential targets. We must be able to identify potential targets. There are infrastructure that naturally excite or are the focus of terrorists. For example, the September 11 terrorist acts on the American Twin Towers, the Trade Towers in New York, was a target. It was a target. The terrorists knew that if they could put it down, those structures down, the American government would go on its knees. And it wasn't the only one. They were also targeting the Pentagon. And what saved America that day was that somehow, go to read history. The next target was the Pentagon. And the other target, the last one was the White House. So there are potential targets. For example, refineries are targets. For example, marketplaces are targets. For instance, hospitals are targets. Educational institutions are targets. Palace of traditional rulers are targets. So, potential targets must be identified. Schools, dormitories. In Nigeria, terrorists go into boarding schools, drive out. Oh, God have mercy. Let's not talk about that, but apply your heart to the history, the current history of Nigeria in the past 10 years, and you got what I'm saying. So we must identify potential targets and secure them. Number three, prepare for terrorism. Prepare. You cannot say it cannot happen, it will happen. How do we prepare? Systematically evaluate current capabilities and deficiencies in responding to an incident involving weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Putin, the president of Russia, did issue a threat last year, 2022, of a possible use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine. And if that should happen, the rest, let's just pass down from there. So, systematically evaluate current capabilities and deficiencies in responding to an incident involving weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Then make sound administrative adjustment to address deficiencies. Part B, perform risk assessment and vulnerability of the communities. And C, ensure first responders like hospitals, military, health workers, firefighters are in readiness for any event. Don't forget, number 4, protective equipment and shelter. The government of the Jewish state of Israel has built bunkers that whenever there's a strike from the Palestinian, the Israelis will hear a warning, alarm, and rush into protective bunkers to keep themselves protected. These are ways, and I'm not able to exhaust within this time limit I was given, with which we can prepare for global terrorism and to manage it without getting much destruction and losses. God bless you. In the next segment, I am coming very soon.